So I'd now like to introduce Natalie Eades, who's one of my colleagues in Cardiff. Natalie, I think, has come from a background in gastroenterology and then swerved into renal disease, and has been working with us for the last couple of years on all aspects of nephrology, but with a particular focus on transplantation, transplant recipients. So thanks very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. That's quite the presentation to follow on from, but I'll do my best. My name's Natalie. I've been in the kidney and pancreas transplant team for a couple of years now. I've had the absolute privilege of working in the transplant team, being a tiny cog in the massive complex team that they are. Today I'm going to talk about nutrition and IgA nephropathy. Now, this is a massive area. I've tried to focus mainly on the bits that are best researched and also relevant to, I kind of like to look at the blanket rules for everyone with IgA nephropathy, but also with CKD and chronic kidney disease in general. So most of the advice in this presentation applies to people with kidney disease that have got it for various reasons. And as you know, you just heard in that amazing presentation, some of the things we look at when we're looking at managing IgA nephropathy can be managing blood pressure, managing inflammation, and preventing kidney damage. Now, nutrition can come into that, nutrition and lifestyle. And what I love about nutrition, and one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it, is it's looking often at prevention rather than just treatment. We can help prevent a lot of the progression, or we can help some of the symptoms and some of the progression of IgA nephropathy with nutrition and lifestyle. So we're going to have a look at protein in the diet, salt, looking at processed foods, which is quite a topical one, whether there's any supplements that can be helpful, and general diet recommendations. Okay. So protein. Protein's the first thing I'm going to talk about today. With IgA nephropathy, as you'll know, you can lose protein in the urine. So sometimes people wonder whether they need more protein in the diet because of that. So you can lose up to almost 4 grams a day with IgA nephropathy, but this wouldn't be enough to kind of recommend changing the diet and needing more protein. So let me just place this. So very low protein diets, they actually used to be the recommendations and one of the things that people with kidney disease were recommended to follow. The research has changed quite a lot from that now. We don't recommend the really low protein diets. Sometimes when your kidney function's really reduced, we say to cut down to kind of 0.8 to 1 grams per kilo. But in general, we say a moderate protein diet because your body needs protein, and having not enough protein in the diet can lead to muscle wasting. Similarly, we also don't recommend having too much protein because that can increase some of the toxins that build up in the blood. And over a long period of time, a high protein diet can actually reduce kidney function more. So we essentially recommend the kind of moderate protein diet, and that will help to maintain your muscle mass and maintain all the other functions that are needed in the body with protein. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is salt intake. Now, salt's a big one that's involved in managing blood pressure. So that's why we like to talk about it. Now, with salt intake, we say to everyone to try and cut back on your salt intake and try and have a pretty low salt diet. A high salt diet and having too much salt can cause higher blood pressure, and over time then that can cause more damage to the kidneys. When we've talking about earlier with the glomerulus and the capillaries around there, you don't want to be damaging those more, and high blood pressure can do that. The other good thing about reducing your salt intake is you're also more likely to reduce your fluid overload. So reduce the chance of getting the swollen legs, the swollen arms that can come with kidney disease, especially as it progresses over time. So there's 2 good ways of reducing your salt. And the first one that everyone always assumes and knows is reducing the salt at the table. So not adding salt when you're having your meal or in the cooking process. But the other thing that's really important, and actually in some ways most important, is looking at the salt content in the food you're buying. So salt's added a lot in the processes with food that's being produced. And with these days, there tends to be more and more salt added to food as foods are more and more processed. So as you can see here, these are the 2 nutrition labels that you tend to get on food products when you're buying them. The ones on this one is the one you get on the front. And then the one in the box in the top right corner is the one you tend to get more on the back of the labels. So it's important to try and have a look at those when you're picking food options. And what I like about the one on the bottom, so what we call the traffic light food labels, is that it makes it colour coded, so it can be a lot easier to have a look at what you're buying and looking at the salt content. So if the food's high in salt, the box will be in red. So that's a nice easy one you can look at when you're making food choices. So how much salt is in processed foods? I'm going to give you 3 options. I'd like you to see how much salt you think comes from processed food in our diets. Is it A, 10%, B, 75%, or C, 40%? Anyone got any ideas? Yeah, you're too good. It is B. I thought you would know that. But yes, it's B. 75% of our salt in our diet actually comes from the processed foods we eat. So people often really overlook that and they say, I've cut out salt at the table, but it's not enough. We really need to start looking at the foods that we're eating, particularly the processed foods. So what are processed foods? Because often people aren't entirely sure what we mean when we say processed foods. So when we say processed, it's essentially changing the food from its original form. And loads of foods, in fact, most foods that we buy in the shop are processed in some way. And that's not to say that all processing is bad. Sometimes we need processing to help foods last a bit longer. Sometimes they can improve the flavour or how they're presented. What we're really more concerned about is how processed they are. So typically, the more processed a food is, the more changed it is from its original form and the more ingredients that are added. And it's typically those ingredients that are the problem. We know that the processing in itself and changing it from its original form can change the nutritional profile, and those extra ingredients can be problematic, but I'll talk about that in the next slide. So the main focus when we talk about processed foods, and is actually the ultra-processed foods. And those terms are often used interchangeably, but it's the ultra-processed foods that we're most concerned about. And there's a lot of new research coming out about this. Over the last decade, we've begun to get a lot better understanding of the effects these ultra-processed foods are having for us. So when we say ultra-processed foods, we mean there's obviously more processing. There's more ingredients, particularly ingredients you never have at home, very artificial ingredients. And they're designed to be more enjoyable and even addictive. Some of the biggest companies in the world that produce food spend millions on designing foods and engineering foods to be more addictive, so that we spend more money on them, we consume them more. And this is really problematic because typically the way they're more addictive, they're often a lot more unhealthy as well. They'll aim to kind of increase I'll talk about the next slide, but they tend to increase the salt content, the fat content, the sugar content. So this is why I'll talk about why they're bad. They tend to be lower in vitamins and minerals, as I mentioned, because they're often really changed from their original form. They can be treated with a lot of heat. They can be cooked for a lot of time. They can be reduced down into powder. All these things can make them lose their nutritional value. They tend to be higher in harmful ingredients. Now, there's more and more research coming out about different additives that are used in processed foods that can have a really negative effect on us. And that's a whole topic I could spend a lot of time talking about. But it's relevant here because lots of these things can change lots of different processes in the body. So as I mentioned, that some of the biggest companies spend millions on making these foods more addictive. One of the key things that they can do, including adding fat and salt and sugar, is making them softer. So we know now that if foods are soft, they're much quicker to eat and you're far more prone to eating more of them. And this can lead to gaining weight over time because you tend to eat more of the product and they tend to be higher in calories. So what does this lead to? This leads to a diet lacking in vitamins and minerals. Diet's very high in fat, sugar, salt and potassium, and phosphate, which can be problematic when you've got reduced kidney function. They tend to be high in some of the more harmful additives, and it leads to overconsumption of calories. So what's the effects of this? So it can increase our risk of obesity, some types of cancer, heart disease, diabetes. It can even affect our mental health over time. and it can contribute to kidney failure. This is something that's come out a lot in research over the last couple of decades, the relationship between diets high in processed foods and kidney damage and kidney failure over time. Now, I know with IgA nephropathy, it's an autoimmune condition. It does not say that it is caused by diet and lifestyle. However, over time, a diet that's not very healthy, and it's people that are lacking physical activity and things like that, it can drive the disease faster. So looking at diet's really important here. There's more research coming out recently on how it can weaken the intestinal resistance to bacteria, toxins, and other hostile compounds. And this links back in with that idea about the gut microbiome. We know that over time, ultra-processed foods can have quite a negative effect on the microbiome. And in time, it can mean that the intestines are absorbing more of the bad bacteria and toxins that they'd normally be able to create a barrier for and fight off. So there's more research coming out now that ultra-processed foods are even linked to things like intestinal cancers and those sorts of things. And over time, because you're lacking in those vitamins and minerals and that intestinal barrier is weakened, you're more prone to infections, and you've got a reduced immune system, because we know how important the gut microbiome is and the gut is for our immune system. It's one of the biggest interfaces between the environment and what's going on in the bodies. So supplements, I thought I would include this because it's quite a topical area. I'm sure lots of people, when you're diagnosed with kidney disease, and especially with a progressive disease, you're wondering if there's any supplements that you can take to help. So I thought I would talk about a couple of supplements that you'll see when you Google supplements in kidney disease. One of the main things I want to say here is, unfortunately, there are no particular supplements recommended to prevent or treat IgA nephropathy or kidney failure. Okay. There's insufficient evidence on their usefulness. You're going to see absolutely loads. You go into Holland and Barrett. Like I said, if you Google it, there's going to give you loads of options for kidney disease supplements. But there's not enough research currently on their usefulness and also on their actual safety. This is the other issue. One thing to note, and I would see this a lot in transplant particularly, lots of supplements can interfere with your medications. Some of them are well documented, some of them there's not enough research on, but that's not to say that they're safe with medications, okay? A lot of the time we simply don't know. But if you are someone that's going to be looking down the line at a kidney transplant, you don't want to be getting involved with a lot of the supplements on the market, because they can interfere with some of the medications that we really tightly control the levels of in the blood. And thinking dietetically in particular, I always say to people with reduced kidney function, that particularly the lower the function is, we say to avoid any vitamin A and vitamin E supplements, because they can build up. As your kidney's not able to break them down and excrete them as they normally would, they can build up in the system, and that can be toxic. So if anything, that's the main thing I'd want you to know, is to try and avoid those vitamin A and vitamin E supplements. If your diet is particularly lacking in those vitamins for whatever reason, it's important that you consult you'll have a dietitian available to you in your local health board, and you can always ask for a referral and they can advise. There are some forms of those vitamins that we can prescribe, but we'd like to do that under the supervision of the medical team. So, as a little message, herbal does not equal safe always, especially when you've got reduced organ function such as kidney disease, okay? So when you I Googled supplements in kidney disease, and these are some of the things that came up, okay? Just as an example, I mean, hundreds came up. So thinking about these supplements, so we've got here, this seems to be a hot topic, the Erva Ursi and horsetail. There's not enough research on the safety of this, and there's some limited evidence that they can be toxic to the liver. They may affect the kidneys and can even affect the eyes on long-term doses. And you won't see this anywhere on the nutrition labelling of the product. You've got this rehydration and recovery supplement. These can contain high amounts of potassium, which can build up in the time if you've got really reduced kidney function, okay? And as we mentioned before, that can create some problems. So that's the sort of thing we'd be recommending to avoid, because at that dose, the potassium's good, your kidneys are going to really struggle to excrete it all, so it can build up, and that can come with heart problems and things like that. We got licorice root. This may increase your blood pressure, and there's some evidence that it actually increases fluid retention. And there's no evidence that it's going to help the kidney function currently. There's not enough evidence for that. So again, it's going to be doing more damage than good. Cod liver oil, that's one that normally I wouldn't have an issue with, but because it's high in vitamin A, it can build up over time. Same with a vitamin E supplement. You might want to, you've seen some evidence about vitamin E and anti-aging and that sort of thing, but I would avoid recommending it if you've got reduced kidney function. And a leg cramp supplement. So this contains high amounts of phosphate too. So again, I've had patients that have taken these understandably for some of the symptoms from IgA nephropathy, kidney failure over time can create leg cramps, but I would avoid any supplements that promise to help with that because it can cause more damage than good. Okay. So what if I told you we have a product that could work for you? Okay. What if I told you that it could have a 27 to 29% lower risk of heart disease? Some evidence that it can be 8 to 25% lower risk of all-cause mortality. 13 to 30% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. There's some evidence that it could even send depression into remission in 32% of people, but this was combined with a support group. It could lower your blood pressure, lower your chance of developing obesity, lower your chance of developing cancer. Some evidence that improves cholesterol, and can even help slow the progression of CKD with some patient groups. Would anyone be interested? Improves immune function as well, okay? And has little to no side effects. Anyone have any ideas what it is? Good suggestions, guys. You're probably right with those two. The Mediterranean diet, okay? Now, I've included the DASH diet as well, which is very similar. The DASH diet was developed for helping to manage hypertension, so high blood pressure and heart disease. But I'm going to focus more on the Mediterranean diet because it's a bit more optimized, there's a bit more research on it. So I'm the biggest advocate of Mediterranean diet. I'm always trying to get everyone involved with it. It's really well researched as one of the healthiest diets for chronic disease and from inflammation. So as discussed, that was some of the benefits and some of the research that's come out with the Mediterranean diet. It's really healthy diet. And when I say it's a diet, it's less than a diet, it's more of a way of a lifestyle. So the Mediterranean diet research first came out when they noticed that people in the Mediterranean were typically living much longer than some of the other populations. And the first focus of research is why the risks of heart disease was much, much lower in those population groups. So they started to research why that was. And over time, they found that it was to do with the kind of aspects of the diet. So having lots of fruits and vegetables, having lots of whole grains and grains, that's a really big one in the diet, okay. Having lots of nuts and seeds, which we know we don't get enough of in the UK. Having some of the healthy fats, so particularly things like olive oil, avocados, some nut oils, those sorts of things, and fatty fish. Now, in lots of the Western cultures and Western diet, we've come quite fat phobic in the sense that people are trying to cut down on fat altogether and cut fat out of the diet and consider fat as calories, which it can be. But we know that how the healthier fats and some of the plant fats and fish fats are metabolized quite differently, and they have a really cardioprotective effect. And they protect lots of the blood vessels in the body, which is completely relevant to IgA nephropathy because we're trying to look after those capillaries, we're trying to look after those blood, all that area. And the other good thing is it reduces inflammation, which is a really big area of IgA nephropathy, and that inflammation over time causes damage to the kidneys. So you've probably heard about anti-inflammatory diets. There's a whole lot of information about anti-inflammatory diets on the internet. Most of them aren't anti-inflammatory. In the sense, there's detox diets, there's all these sorts of diets. The closest thing to an anti-inflammatory diet is the Mediterranean diet, okay? And I've also included the Mediterranean diet pyramid there is kind of highlights the constitution of the diet. I've also included the Eat Well Guide, which is the UK guidelines for healthy eating. You've probably seen it on the wall of your GP and that sort of thing. They're the same but different. So all of those aspects of the Mediterranean diet are still in the Eat Well Guide, but you can see with the Mediterranean diet, it's more of a pyramid because it shows you how much of the different food groups should come from different parts of the diet, and the focus really is on those plant foods at the bottom. That's what we recommend filling most of your diet with is the plant-based foods, and limiting your intake of the red meats and the processed foods at the top there. And like I said, exercise is a really important one there. Staying physically active is just as important as diet here, okay. And you don't have to fully understand this picture, but it just shows the Mediterranean diet. Actually, we're still learning a lot about it. So there's the main constitution of the diet, which is the fibre, the plants, the vitamins, the minerals. But we're learning that lots of these things in combination are having the anti-inflammatory effects on the body, and we've still got more to find out about it. But there's so many aspects of the Mediterranean diet that can help reduce your risk of heart disease and slow the progression of kidney disease and IgA nephropathy. So it's a very hot topic of research, and we're still finding out lots about it. So in conclusion, I'd recommend to aim for a good protein intake, not too much, not too little. I'd avoid a very high or very low protein diet. I would say to try and follow a low salt diet to help reduce your blood pressure and reduce the chances of fluid overload. I would say to look to reduce your ultra-processed food intake to reduce the inflammation in the body and help optimize your immune system and reduce the risk of obesity, and to aim to incorporate some of the aspects of the Mediterranean diet and way of life. So having a nice balanced diet with lots of plant-based foods, reduced ultra-processed foods, and keeping active. And that's it. Any questions?
That was great. Thank you very much. I've got one question. So
yes.
The horsetail supplement.
Mm-hmm.
Is horsetail a plant? Or
It is.
Literally the tail.
It's a type of plant. It's a type of plant, yes. That seems to be a really hot one. Like I said, when I looked up some of the supplements available, they sell that in Holland and Barrett. It seems to be a really popular one, but yeah, the research in there for it, but no, it's not actual horsetail. One thing I did forget to say with the Mediterranean diet, and one thing I didn't mention in the presentation is about the low phosphate and the low potassium diet. The reason I didn't mention those today is because I always like to say we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So avoiding some of the foods really high in protein, really high in phosphate, I say it's worth cutting back on if your kidney function is very reduced, because your body will find it hard to process all of it out of the system. But having kind of the average amount in the diet tends to be a fine amount. So that's the only time sometimes we say be careful of nuts. If you're really trying to tightly control your potassium level, then sometimes they can cause it to go up a bit. But in the rest of the digestive system is absolutely fine. The way that the gut digests and the rest of the digestive system will cope absolutely fine, and they've got lots of anti-inflammatory properties. And the other good thing about the Mediterranean diet that I didn't include in there, some of the foods in the Mediterranean diet are quite high in phosphate and potassium. But what we do know is because of all the fibres and the other compounds that are in the food, you actually don't absorb as much of it that's in the textbooks, that's the potassium content, but you only absorb about 50% of it because the fibres are blocking some of the absorption. Whereas when you look at ultra-processed foods, you typically absorb about 100% of that potassium and that phosphate in the diet. So on paper, they may be similar amounts, and they might be high potassium, high phosphate foods in the Mediterranean diet, but you're not absorbing all of it. And I've often found people say, I can't have fruits, can't have vegetables in the diet because of the potassium, but then they're having so much ultra-processed foods, it's actually got twice the amount of potassium and phosphate in there, and it's just a downward spiral then. So it's really important to try and incorporate those plants early on in the diet and keep incorporating them. And there's always be a dietitian around in your local health board that you can be referred to that can give you some more advice on that. But yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah.
I've got so in terms of fish, I've probably done that. In terms of fish, is there any fish that, like mackerel and stuff like that? Is that okay?
Yes, that's an oily fish. That's a really nutritious fish to have.
Which fish would you stay away from, like cod and stuff like that?
Well, there's none you have to stay away from. I mean, most of the fish, to be honest, are oily fish. You will find if they're really processed. For example, tuna, if you catch it out of the sea, is an oily fish, but by the time it's soaked in brine, you get it out of the can, it's no longer considered an oily fish. So all the fresh fish are really good. Most of them will be really high in oils, and mackerel's a brilliant one. Mackerel, salmon, most of the fishes you can get. Yes, yeah, oily fish, yep, sardines are really good.
I was looking at something the other day, and it said not to have tuna if it's canned in olive oil, but have it in water, canned in water, because the oil actually takes something out of the tuna during its processing.
Well, you could say that with the brine too, really. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I would have thought oil with... Yeah, I suppose, yeah. I mean, the oil's good too because the oil will have extra fat-soluble vitamins in there as well. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a better or worse one. I mean, if you're trying to cut the calories in the ones in brine would be better, but if they're in oil, there's going to be extra fat-soluble vitamins there and heart-healthy fat. So I would say that the one in oil is absolutely fine to have, yeah.
Okay.
Or either.
Where is the food processed? Is it processed in the small bowel, or is it processed throughout generally?
Small bowels where you're going to get most of the digestion and the absorption of the vitamins. The large bowels where you get later on, which is more to do with water reabsorption. So all along the bowel there's a process, but it's a small bowel you'll get most of the digestion, most of the vitamins.
Okay, so people who've got like no bowel at all, basically the food was processed just in a small element.
Well, it depends which part of the bowel it was taken out.
The large part was taken out.
Yeah, you still do quite well with digesting your food. There tends to be more issues with diarrhea and other things like that caused by water not being absorbed properly. If it's a large bowel that's taken out, typically you absorb your nutrition pretty fine when you still got all your small bowel.
But I noticed that there was some red wine there.
Yes, there was, yes. And I didn't talk about that much in the presentation actually, but yeah, there is research that the wine in itself is helpful in moderation, not going too crazy. Yeah, everyone to the bar afterwards. There's some interesting research on when I talked about the different elements of the Mediterranean diet and how different parts of the foods can interact with each other. There is research on the effects of some of the compounds in the wine and how they actually react with some of the fibres in the food and some of the vitamins and minerals. And some compounds we haven't even discovered yet, but we're learning that they interact with each other. So the initial research and the focus was on red wine, and red wine does have a lot more polyphenols than some of the other alcohols, wines in particular, but lots of alcohols have polyphenols, and it's the polyphenols that can react with some of the other elements in the diet. So in moderation, we say stick to the drinking guidelines in the UK, so it's no more than 14 units a week. Excess amounts can cause more gut damage, actually. But yeah, in moderation, in small amounts, it can be beneficial for the heart, but there's pros and cons. I mean, you can look at other aspects. Even small amounts can be bad for some of the good bacteria in the gut. So it depends what health outcome you're looking at, really. I mean, the guidelines typically are to try and keep the alcohol intake really low.
How does fasting or intermittent fasting affect the kidneys?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's lots of research that's come out about intermittent fasting. Now, I was very sceptical of it when I first heard about it. I thought it was one of the fads. There is some good research that's come out about diabetes management and about it can even help with heart disease if done properly. Now, I always say if you are going to do intermittent fasting, it's really important because you're going to have reduced food intake, that you're making sure you have really nutritious meals when you do eat. I've seen lots of people that start intermittent fasting and their diets they're not getting enough protein, they're not getting the vitamins, they're not getting their 5 a day, and it can cause more damage than good. You've got to be really careful there. If you would like to do intermittent fasting, there's good results for, like I said, weight loss, heart health, and diabetes. But yeah, it's just really important that you focus on getting all the nutrition you need if you are going to be doing that, because obviously the outcomes depend on what food you're eating in that sense. But it can help with insulin resistance, and it can help with blood glucose management. So there is some evidence around that. In terms particularly for kidney disease, I think there's more research that's needed in that area. We know that if you're obese and you're overweight and you lose weight intermittent fasting, that's going to be a big factor that can help the progression in the management of the kidney disease in that sense. But I don't think there's enough research particularly on other aspects of it other than the weight and the blood glucose management, and how if your weight's uncontrolled and your blood glucose is uncontrolled, like I said, that can cause more damage. So it can help the kidneys in that regard. But as a blanket rule, if you were a healthy weight and you were having a normal balanced diet, there wouldn't be enough research that going on to intermittent fasting would have a difference, if that makes sense. So it's about managing those other risk factors. Yeah.
Mention not supplementing with vitamin A and K. Should people with kidney disease and IgA nephropathy be conscious of foods that contain higher levels of vitamin A and K?
That's a good question. Theoretically, yes. I mean, there's not many foods that are really high in vitamin A and vitamin E to toxic amounts. The main ones are actually things like offal, particularly liver. So animal liver can be one that can be particularly high in vitamin A, but actually we recommend to everyone not to have too much liver for that reason, because the vitamin A can become toxic. We'd never say to be eating liver every day, which, to be fair, I don't think anyone does anyway. So yeah, you don't have to be particularly careful. No, we typically don't get enough vitamin A and vitamin E in the diet, actually. If you're having loads of red meat, you're more likely to, but we typically actually don't get enough in the average diet. The supplements you tend to often get kind of 2 to 3 times the daily amount we recommend in a healthy individual anyway, so they have way higher amounts than you'd ever get in the diet. That's why we say to kind of avoid them, because they're much higher than what you'd get in the diet normally. Okay. Any other questions?
Can I ask one question?
Yes. Yep.
If a baked potato
is processed. How should I cook my potatoes? That's the only way I do it. So.
Well, if you got the baking potatoes from the shop, they're completely unprocessed.
Yeah, but I mean, like, what's the ideal way? Sorry. Like, when I saw it there in the image that you had, I was like, baked potato being processed. What?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that was on the less processed. Let me see.
It was on the less. It
Yes.
wasn't the super processed.
Yeah, so
is there a better way to cook potatoes, basically?
Not really. I think so. I think that was on the minimally processed side, and that was actually to show that most foods are processed in some way. I mean, even when you get some of the fruit and vegetables from in the shop, they're going to be processed because they're going to have been cleaned and that sort of thing. So minimally processed, absolutely fine. You've got to process things in at least a little bit these day and age to keep it healthy and safe to eat. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. Like I said, it was mainly just the ultra processed foods I was concerned about, because they're the ones that by the time you've got the potato and you've cooked it for ages, and then you've turned it into a powder, extracted all the water, all the vitamins go with that, that's when it starts to be a problem. But a baked potato in itself is one of the least processed foods you can have, so that's absolutely fine, and it's very nutritious. Yeah. Yeah.
On the slide earlier, you mentioned about the kidneys reported production of vitamin D. So is that something that tends to be low in people with kidney disease? And if so, is vitamin D supplementation for bone health and musculoskeletal health important then?
That's a really good question, and you're right, yes. So there's lots of research that shows that you are a lot more prone to having a vitamin D deficiency with kidney disease. As your kidney's not working. So with vitamin D, there tends to be the two forms. There's the inactive form and there's the active form. Now, your kidneys are really important in turning it into the active form of vitamin D to be useful and to work in the body. So most people are more prone to vitamin D deficiency, and we tend to keep quite a good watch of the vitamin D levels in the body. Most people with kidney disease will have it checked now and again to check that if your levels are low. If it is, we'll prescribe the active form of vitamin D for you to take. Lots of the research was that you don't convert it at all with kidney disease, but there's more research coming out now. You can still convert it and you can still maintain an adequate amount of vitamin D, but it's one to watch. It's different for everyone. And you can get a bit of vitamin D in the diet. I always recommend actually to most people at a population level to be taking vitamin D. It is one of the better researched supplements that as a population level in the UK, we don't get enough vitamin D, we don't get a lot of sun, and it's the sun that helps to convert it plays a role in the conversion of the inactive vitamin D to active. So as UK population level, we don't get enough. So I do recommend people to take it anyway. So it's typically fine to take. It's worth just checking in with your kidney team whether it's okay for you to take. They typically like to prescribe it anyway, and they'll prescribe it for you. So I'd say to speak to them, and they can check your levels and prescribe it if it's needed. That's okay.
Supermarket bread.
Right, okay. Far away. No, it's not all bad. Bread, again, you can't really avoid bread being processed. If it wasn't processed, it wouldn't be bread. So, yeah, it's fine to have. Salt, interestingly, one of the biggest contributors to our salt intake in the UK diets is actually bread. They've been working on trying to reduce the salt content of bread over the last few years. And they found before we had really high amounts of salt in bread, and they started doing trials where they reduced it to see if anyone would notice the flavour profile changing if they reduced the salt, and people didn't really notice. So they cut back, I think it was about 20% of the salt in UK bread they reduced. It's still pretty high, especially some of the kind of the bakery breads that you get, the more fresher ones tend to be higher in salt. And you can look for some of the bread brands do have reduced salt options, which you can't always really tell the difference with salt-wise, but bread is one that's quite high in salt, yeah.
I probably don't need the mic. It was just a quick one. Have you heard of the yoga wrap? Do you recommend it?
Oh, I haven't heard of that one. What does that involve?
Looks at foods and gives them a scoring out of 100. Foods and products, all sorts of things. Yeah, I was just interested whether you have it.
I have a feeling I might know the one you mean. If it's the one I've seen that also does other products, I'm not sure if it's saying that does skincare and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't have enough information to know whether it's reliable or not. I actually wondered the same thing when I saw it on TikTok. So I'm not sure. I don't know where they're getting their information from. I think lots of how they label different ingredients being high, low, or moderate. I'm not sure if they have enough research to be recommending that it's definitely dangerous at that amount or definitely safe at that amount. I should imagine. I don't know if they've got enough research to be rating products that accurately on how okay they are and how not okay they are, and it all depends again on the health outcomes you're looking at, really. So I mean, technically you could look at fruits and say that they're red for being high in sugar, but that's not to say that they're still really healthy for you. So it depends. And I don't think there's enough evidence for it, but I can't give a definitive answer for that. Sorry. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me, guys.